Hello and welcome to the Leicester versus Bournemouth match preview. Big game for everyone at the club. Can Steve Cooper finally get our first win of the season, or will it be more trouble for the Foxes as the Cherries take over? Let's find out. Let's look at the table before we come into this game. Table's starting to take shape, and unsurprisingly, we're near the bottom end. We always knew this was going to be a struggle this season, but I think we can all say that we're a little disappointed not to have more points given some of our performances, and I think the quality of the squad that we have, which I think hasn't looked too overawed in certainly this bottom half of the table. Bournemouth are top of the bottom half, bit of a tongue twister there on 8 points, but they have had a recent run of not so good results, which we'll come to in a second. As for Leicester, we got the 3 draws, but another loss against Arsenal. Unlucky not to get something given there were just a few minutes left at 2-2, although the underlying data shows that we really took a bit of a tonking in that one. Let's look at the recent form and let's look at our opponents more than us, as we're more familiar with Leicester than Bournemouth. The last game they played was against another relegation rival, which was Southampton. Now, Southampton under Russell Martin have that heavy possession game, but a little bit like their games against us last season, they didn't convert that possession into too much meaningful action. Only 3 shots on target the whole game. So Bournemouth only had 6. But wow, they were a lot more clinical and they ran out pretty comfortable winners despite having less possession. And they were 3-0 up at halftime. And actually, it was a little bit depressing seeing just how much better they were than Southampton. I am hopeful that we can put up a better challenge than they did. But wow, it's showing you that the gap between Premier League and Championship is really opening up, even if we were just down there for one season. That's a big worry. Prior to that, they played Liverpool. Liverpool beat them very easily, I would say. 3-0 win. I think in this game, Bournemouth were a little bit naive, and I'll show you a little bit why later. And yeah, Liverpool just dominated them on every statistic. Liverpool going under the radar a little bit, I would say. New manager in Arne Slot, but playing pretty good so far, and they were very effective in this game. And this actually wasn't their previous game to that, but I wanted to bring it up because this probably is the craziest game of the season, even if our 4-2 game was pretty epic. This was the game against Everton. Everton were actually 2-0 up with 3 minutes left to play and somehow conspired to lose the game 3-2. Bournemouth didn't even have a shot on target until the 81st minute, but all of a sudden got one and went hell for leather and got a famous win. Crazy game. They actually had better XG in this one. I think this shows you, though, that Bournemouth are good at making the game chaotic. And when a game goes a bit crazy, which they're good at doing, they're very good at taking advantage of it. And that is going to make for an entertaining game, if somewhat of a nerve-wracking one too. Right, Bournemouth have got a very exciting manager called Andoni Iraola. He's another one of these Basque coaches that at the moment seem to be dominating world football, given Spain's Euros win in the international tournament. And of course, you got Pep and Mikel Arteta here in the Premier League. Iraola is going under the radar, but he's low-key done a pretty good job with Bournemouth, I think, changing their style, but making them very effective despite being a fairly mid-table team. What he's really known for is aggressive pressing, although to make it clear, it's this aggressive mid-block pressing. They press in a fairly unconventional way that's very effective for them. So here's a story of 2 managers. On the left, you've got Gary O'Neill, who's currently at Wolves and also under a bit of pressure with them. And he actually managed to keep Bournemouth up in a season that we went down, despite Bournemouth being heavy favourites for relegation. However, you can see that under his tenure, they really had a fairly conservative style. They pretty much, I wouldn't say they parked the bus, but they were a defensive team. Probably because they didn't have the best talents at the time. But under Iraola, you can see just how much more progressive the team is. Now, what's interesting is they don't necessarily rank first or even in the top 5 for a lot of these sequences. But that's because whilst they press, they choose to press at very specific times. And it's specifically in the middle sort of third of the pitch, just inside the opposition half. And they're very effective at turning that into good opportunities for themselves to score from. But he managed to integrate his style and do it very effectively. And maybe something that depresses me slightly is that I think this also shows you the importance of having a more progressive manager, because these sort of stats that we're seeing from Gary O'Neill are, to be honest with you, the same sort of stats we're seeing from Steve Cooper, i.e. a fairly pragmatic and defensive focused coach. Now, don't get me wrong, defenses wins championships. We found that ourselves when Claudio Ranieri was in charge of Leicester. But the game's evolved a lot, and you need to be asking problems even of the top teams. And that's something that I think Iraola does very well. In fact, they've done things like beat Man United 3-0 at Old Trafford. So he's really shown that he knows what he's doing. And this shows you another sort of a stylistic change, although it's quite hard to understand what's going on here. On the left was how they played under Gary O'Neill. on the right is how they play under Iriola. And really the big difference, which might not come across too well on these stills, is that their centre-backs push a lot further forward. And also their midfielders have more of sort of space between them rather than this sort of like weird sort of everyone following a conga line under Gary O'Neill. This is good though. This shows you that they cover all areas of the pitch, and it means that no matter where the ball is, let's say if the ball breaks loose here, you can see that you've got 4 players around them who could snap to get the ball quickly, which is what they're trying to do on the pressing traps. So that's really the style of their system. They're trying to lure you into playing the ball into certain parts of the field, and when it goes there, they're going to try and win it very quickly and then explode with transitions and try and score as fast as possible from that point on. And they're effective at it. Because here's how we can see. This was taken from midway through last season, and you can see that once Iriola really got his style up and running, they scored lots of goals, loads of shots on target. They were the best team in the league at fast break. So once they won the ball back, they certainly waste no time in taking it forward. But what is interesting is that whilst then you can see this is their style, they were the team that won the possession in the middle third more than any other team. That was the defining characteristic of their style. And this was effective with them. It also meant that they conceded less goals because they were trying to be attacking. And again, this is something that I feel our current manager could learn. Sometimes the best form of defending is to attack. So let's talk about their mid-press, and here are some examples of that in action. So this is last season. I think this is against Spurs, and the ball's been played over the top here, and this is their left-back, Milos Kerkez. And you can see that even though he's a left back, he's going to step up. Once the ball is in between here and this space, this middle third, they're going to try and win the ball back as quickly as possible. He wins it, and look, bang. Look how many players Bournemouth get forward very quickly just off this break. And look at their body positions. They're all facing forwards. They're all trying to get on the ball. They know that this ball is going to be slotted across, and someone's going to either try and shoot or stick a leg on it. They're going to try and really take advantage whilst these players are out of position. And you can see that here's 16 here, who's completely free. 2 other men rushing into the box, and there'll probably be another player further here on the right too. So they're really going for it at this moment in time. Here's from that infamous game against Man United that I talked about again. And this is Scott McTominay, who's now gone over to Napoli in Italy. But the ball's about to be received by him. And we know that even though he's a good player, Scott McTominay, he's a good box crasher, he's not the best on the ball. Actually, somewhat similar to Wilfred Ndidi in that aspect. So here he's going to be charged down by Ryan Christie, this is. And again, look at the position where they've decided to charge down. You can really see how he's going to spring into shape at this particular point in time. But they're not doing this in the top third of the pitch. They're actually willing to let the defenders have the team here, because here I feel that they think that if you just press, you're going to make yourself tired. They're trying to press in what Iriola thinks is the most effective position structurally and on the pitch in terms of position to press and win the ball back. And that's this middle third. So McTominay is about to receive the ball. They rob the ball from him, manage to charge forward, sets up Solanke, and Solanke scores for a great goal in his breakthrough season last time round. And yes, this is pretty much how most of their attacks would work. And they're very, very effective at doing it. And they can do it all phases of the game. And like I say, they're willing to take a bet on the game being a bit chaotic because they know that do you know what? Even if they're under the cosh, they can make this opportunity out of nowhere. Hence, like they did against Everton. Looking at their lineup, we can't be exactly sure how they're going to play, but this is how they lined up against Southampton. And some interesting things that you might notice here. Kepa from Chelsea is on loan at Bournemouth for a bit of playing out from the back. He's a mixed goalkeeper in my opinion, but it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. Ryan Christie here, you can see, has been reinvented as a deep line playmaker midfielder, which sounds crazy, but that's how Iriola's getting a tune out of him, and he's doing particularly well. Big money man Evan Nielsen is up front. I'm going to talk about him in a little while. There you go. We've got a really promising left back who I pointed out in the early example called Milos Kerkez, who I think has got a bright future in the game. What's interesting about their team, though, is that I think that this is a real proof of a good manager getting the most out of their players, because I look at this team and I don't think there are too many superstars in this team. In fact, you could make the argument that there isn't any, certainly not since Solanke left for Spurs last year. But yeah, all of them are very, they're good players, they're solid pros, but functionally they get much more out of them than what they put in. Lewis Cook, I think this is Adam Smith. These guys are decent players, but if I'm being honest, I think we have better players in our positions than they do. But yet we will be starting this game as the underdogs, and rightly so, given the fact that they've got a well-coached team that are playing a certain style for a while and are in half-decent form. So speaking about the one to watch, I'm going to bring up Evan Nielsen. And And this is a guy that was signed, I believe, for £37 million from Porto in the summer and is a club record fee for Bournemouth. And that's actually more money than we've ever spent on a player. So that really shows you how the Premier League has changed. And what I like about Evan Nilsson is that this is actually a player that I thought, especially if Enzo Maresca was still our manager, we might have seen at Leicester. I think at the 37 million, that would be too expensive. But why I like this player is that last season, I think a lot of us were looking at Jamie Vardy and thinking, look, Jamie Vardy cannot keep playing forever. You're going to need a replacement for him. And in modern day football, what the sort of managers are looking for these days are players that can play the false nine position. So they're looking for strikers that can drop deep, helping the play, that are good at passing, are good at playing out of pressure, but also capable of leading the press. And Evan Nilsson is great at all of these things. Now, notice that I didn't actually say finishing in any of that. That, of course, is the icing on the cake if you have a player that can do all of that and can finish. But for example, look at Kai Havertz of Arsenal last week. He is really making a difference to Arsenal, but he's not a clinical finisher. But yet the rest of his all-round game is so important because it helps the rest of the team play. And that's what Evan Nilsson can do. So here's an example from Bournemouth. And Kepa's played the ball long and it's gone into Evan Nilsson. And he uses really good strength to chest it down despite being under pressure. And in one movement makes a really good ball and plays it through to one of the attacking midfielders, the 10. So this is Tavernier. And you can see that in doing that, now look at this. 3 men here on a 3-on-3 and they're in on Southampton. This doesn't lead to a goal, but it leads to a really good chance for them that they maybe could have scored in the future. So that's something to look out for him. He did actually score against Southampton, despite missing a penalty against Chelsea, I think, the previous week. So he's got that monkey off his back. And so he might be a bit confident. That was the one thing I was kind of hoping for, that, you know, the longer a striker goes without scoring a goal, the more nervous they feel. Unfortunately for us, he's already off the mark. There's a high chance he could get another one. But it'll be interesting to see how he does. I think 37 million is on the high end for a player like this. The reason I thought Leicester could get him is I thought you might be able to get him for sort of 25 million. And I think he very would be worth looking at, you know, very well be worth looking at that price tag. But, you know, they've sold Dominic Solanke for 60 million and he excelled in this type of system. So this one could be one to watch. He's a Brazilian player and it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up getting a bigger move from Bournemouth if he can do well. You know, Ollie Watkins, his price tag of 32 million was laughed at many seasons ago, but under Unai Emery, he's one of the best strikers in the league. So if you play the right player in the right sort of system, they can really do damage. I hope it's not against Leicester, but one to watch out for sure. Looking at some of his stats just to kind of prove it, look at his pass completion, progressive passes, progressive carries, touches. A lot of this was for Porto, to be fair, but it showed you that even for Porto, he was good at not just being a striker, but someone that can link the play and being very useful for someone who could play in this kind of more modern system. And you can see with his tackles that he was willing to get stuck into. So very promising player to look for. So we talked about some of Bournemouth's strengths, but what about their weaknesses? If we want to win the game, what do we need to do in order to beat them? And they do have a very obvious weakness. And that is that if you can beat their press, they're really wide open. So that's why their games are chaotic, because they will either win the ball back off you and they might score. But if whilst they try and win the ball off you, they fail, if you're a good team, there'll be so many players out of the game that you could have a fairly easy opportunity to take against them. So here we've got Liverpool, who are, of course, one of the best teams in the league. And Konate's got the ball. And you can see Bournemouth already pressed up 5-6 players there. And he just pumped the ball long. Very simple. Played it into Darwin Nunez, who's headed it in here, I think, to Mo Salah. But you can see already that, look, there's 3 players on here. And boom, it's 3-on-3. And they actually do end up scoring off this. It's actually Darwin Nunez who does a very good finish in the end. But it just shows you that what did they really do there? It's so simple. Someone won the ball and they just played it long. To be fair, Darwin's really physical and is going to be able to win the headers there. And that's maybe something that they looked at pre-game. We actually do try that on occasion with Ndidi in our team. So something that we might see as a feature in our play. But pretty much, if you can beat the press, look at the gap between this back 3 and where the rest of their teams are. There are acres to play through. All you got to do is be able to win the ball and play it there. But that's easier said than done. And here's Chelsea. Now, Chelsea, of course, are managed by someone we know only too well, which is Enzo Maresca. And you'll see that a lot of their patterns are pretty similar. But here we can see the ball's being played out to Cole Palmer. And Palmer does a bit of a dummy. And again, look how far Bournemouth have pressed up. So you can see they're trying to compact the game and they're trying to win the ball here. That's what they're trying to do, win the ball of Cole Palmer. But because he's good, he allows it to run. It runs into Madueke. And now look, And this is something I miss under Enzo, actually, is that when they would attack with 5 players and they'd always attack in these spaces. The 2 8s, 2 wingers, and the striker there, Nicholas Jackson. And on this 5, you can see here, it's 5-on-5, but they've got the run on him. Madueke can play the ball through. He plays it into Jackson, and unfortunately, Jackson doesn't score here. He should do, though. But it's a really well orchestrated move, and it's come just very simple, just from beating the press. And that's why Enzo's style, well, we were looking forward to seeing it in the Premier League this season. And I think it's why Chelsea are doing so well. And you could say that, look, okay, Chelsea, they've got better players than Leicester. Yes, it's a fact that they do. But they were struggling pretty badly at large parts of last season. And he still had to integrate many people. But you can see that his style, when it works, you don't need to control games. That's actually what Chelsea are lacking at the moment. But they've got that threat always on transition. So I do think there are some tidbits that we could learn there, because we don't need to dominate the game by possession. We saw what happened with Southampton against Bournemouth. Bournemouth won just by making use of their explosive transitions. So what's going to be the key battle? Well, here I would normally say it's going to be sort of 2 players against one another, or maybe 2 sets of players. But here I'm actually going to be a lot more broader. And I'm going to point out what I think is basically the biggest problem that we've had this season. And it's something that makes me sad, because this was actually one of our biggest strengths last time round. And that is our inability to get out. So here's against Arsenal, and Christensen's got the ball. He throws it to Ndidi, and Ndidi passes it back, and it goes to Okoli. Now you can see that the way that Arsenal was set up, Havertz, that's his pressing trigger, and he's going to charge down Okoli right away. But what Okoli does is he pumps it long, and the ball's cleared up. And it just means that we had the throw and we've lost possession, and now Arsenal are back on it. And in fact, Arsenal end up scoring just before half time. What we would have done last season is that Okoli would have been told to pass it back to Hermansen, to maybe try and go past Havertz and knock it past him, or play it into the free man here, which is fast. And he could have done any one of those options. But it was notable that as a team, we basically don't play out from the back as much as we used to last year. We do it on occasion, but we're not doing it nearly enough. Now, don't get me wrong. When you play out from the back, it can invite trouble, and it will lead to goals against you by mistakes. That happened to us even last season. But the thing is, as I've said before, is that so many teams in the Premier League press, that if you can play out from the press, that's also how you generate chances. And we need to get better at it and go back to what we were doing that was working. Here's another example, and this is in the second half, and this has actually come from a goal kick. So again, what kind of makes me a bit unhappy is Hermansen's got the goal kick, and he could have played it here to one of the centre halves, like Okoli, to build out slowly like we did last season. Last season, we'd play the ball out slowly, wait for the press to come onto us, and then play in behind the space behind them. But under Cooper, I feel that we force it too much. So here he's gone long straight away to Justin. And this is, I guess, a bit similar to the Liverpool example that I've shown earlier. Now, to be fair, Justin wins the header, and he even manages to not just win the header, but plays it into his teammate. And you can see that Buonanote's drifted here. I think this is something that we're looking for as a way to get out. So he's got the ball, but unfortunately, Buonanote tries to play it centrally, and this time around the pass doesn't quite work out. Thomas recovers it. Vardy was slightly on his heels, and again, it's an Arsenal attack, and we lost possession of the ball. Now, look, going direct is not something that I'm against. In fact, some of the goals we scored last season were done exactly through this methodology. But the thing is we're just doing it too often. It's our go-to get out of trouble, tactic. And the problem is that means you'll never get out. And that's why it was just wave after wave of pressure against Arsenal. And we've even had that in some of our previous games too. Like, that's exactly what happened to us in the second half against Crystal Palace. In the last 10 minutes, we were too defensive, weren't brave enough to try and play out from the back, which meant that it was just constantly seeing the ball come back against us over and over, and the inevitable would happen. Spurs should have been out of sight in the first half against us in the first game of the season. Luckily, they didn't take their chances, and that's why we managed to get back into the game. But again, we weren't brave enough in terms of playing out from the back. And here's an example from last season. And here's Ricardo on the ball, playing as a double pivot, plays it in there to Pratt. Pratt's played it into Fatawu. And you can see we're attacking with 5 players again, which is something that we did under Enzo. This has gone to Iheanacho, another player that's left. It's going to go back to Fatawu and have some of this. Bosh. Now, of course, that's a top-class goal in terms of the finish. But what I want to bring out to you is this is exactly what I'm saying, is that last season, look, this is Stolarczyk. He plays it in. He's calm under pressure despite being charged down. And look, by playing through their press, and this is against Bournemouth, the team that we're playing on the weekend, we open them up. So that's how we beat Bournemouth. We beat them by beating the press and using their tactic against them. That's what the top teams can do to them. It's what we did ourselves even this calendar year Will we do it on Saturday? That I'm not so sure about. So what's going to be our expected lineup? And actually, I don't think there's going to be any changes. I think we're going to line up in exactly the same way that we played against Arsenal, but just play a bit differently. So I think Buonanotte will stay in the team. He'll normally be on the right outside, but will drift in centrally. That is a big issue I've got with the way that the team is structured. I think it leaves Justin way too exposed. It's not his fault. When he's 2-on-1 against him, it's going to cause him trouble. And I think we should go back to the system from last year. But Cooper's not going to do it. He could put in Bilal. I don't think he will. He could put in Jordan Ayew. That one wouldn't surprise me, if I'm being honest, to try and win like the 50-50 duels in the press. But I think that would be a mistake. I think Buonanotte looks like a top player. I suppose you could say he's not our player, but he's got quality. His set piece gave us the first goal, and he had, of the players that we had, I think he was one of the ones that had a good game. Ndidi, I think he's absolutely fine as a box crasher. I've said that many times, but I think in a game like this, where you're going to be challenged on the mid-press, whilst they might target him, I also think that in those 50-50s, he's going to help us win the ball back ourselves. And when it gets chaotic, it could be something that leads him into a lot of success. I think like last week, Skip and Winks are going to be important. I think they did not do a good job last time round. I don't necessarily think it's their fault. I think it's actually the structure that we use too. But they need to try and control the ball and play their way through that press. If they can do that, they're more than talented enough to do it. We could be successful. That said, with all the things that I've discussed, what are my match predictions? So I think this game is going to be chaos. It'll be very end-to-end. That'll actually make for an exciting game. And look, if we weren't in relegation trouble, it would actually be, I think, actually a really good Saturday afternoon. You know, one of those where even if it's a 2-2, it's a really enjoyable one. You have fun. And I'll give a lot of credit to Bournemouth for that. That style, I think, as a fan, is really easy to get behind. We have to be brave in playing out the press. That's where we were going wrong. We did that against the same opposition this year or last season, and it's why we were successful. That wasn't the only example of that in the game that we did. I have to say, though, that under Cooper, despite all my sort of negativity, we have been competitive in many of the games. And what I mean by that is we have a good tackling percentage. We actually win the ball back a lot. We get stuck in. We have a go. We're not a passive team. And so actually, if the game becomes chaotic, that could actually suit us. So even though I wouldn't like us to start with Jordan Ayew, someone like that can play a part in a game like this. Indeed, the same. Those players that are willing to get stuck in and help win the ball could make a difference. I'd rather he came on towards the end rather than start it. But look, if we actually, here's my final point. We need to start the game well to have a chance, because Spurs could have been out of sight at halftime, and at home we started slowly against Everton. But if we started the way that we started against Palace, we can get at Bournemouth, because whilst I think they are well coached, I don't think that man for man, they're the strongest team in the league. I think, for example, Palace have got better squad than their man for man. I think they're better than Everton, though, to be fair. Fulham is maybe a fair comparison, and Fulham made pretty easy work of us. So that's maybe my slight worry. So I guess based on all that, that's my prediction. I'm going to go for a 1-1. I think we will get something out of it. Is that enough? Maybe. I'm concerned that, to be honest with you, we've had a run of fairly winnable games and we still haven't got a win yet. We need that win. We need a couple of wins. You know, I think we need to get 10 wins minimum I mean, that'll only give us 30 points. So probably going to need 12 maybe wins. Where are they coming from? These are sort of teams that you'd fancy on paper. You've got a chance. It's at home. So I hope we can win, but I'm not feeling too positive. Sorry, guys. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like it, turn on the alarm bell for the notifications. What else is happening on the channel? On Saturday, I'm going to be doing Match Day Live. I'm going to actually be doing the whole watch along and an instant match reaction. So, oh my goodness, going to have a bit of a long day there. And somehow I'm going to have to find time to do the match analysis, which I will try to come up with on Sunday, but I've got a feeling might slip till Monday, where I'll try and have a look back at what's actually happened with the game. What's interesting is that this game is the last one before another international break, and I think we'll be 7 games in, plus the cup games. So you're almost at 10 games played from Cooper. And I think that'll give us quite an interesting perspective of where we are as a team and what we need to improve. We shall find out. Will Fatawu play? He's in my image here now. I'm not sure. This was his joyous face after scoring that goal against Bournemouth. I miss seeing it, if I'm being honest. Thank you very much, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.